Okay, welcome everyone to our conversation on finding growth amid complex risks. My name is Michael Wang. I am an anchor at China Global Television Network, or CGTN. A warm welcome to everyone to the beautiful coastal city of Dalian, and hopefully that wonderful sea breeze can clear our minds a little bit, offer some clarity on such an important topic. So I think in the world right now, we definitely see shoots of economic optimism, but I think we can all agree that that optimism may be tempered by challenges in an interconnected set of very intricate and complex risks. And that's hopefully what we are going to explore today. How do we better navigate the complexity, these risks, to foster more resilient and more sustainable growth? I want to draw everyone's attention first to the screens around you. So this is a visual from the World Economic Forum's May edition Chief Economist's Outlook. So on the left side of this visual, you'll see the positive side of the ledger, the growth drivers in the next 5 years. Not surprisingly, of course, technological transformation. I see artificial intelligence, the green transition. These will be the positive forces that push growth forward in the next 5 years. But unfortunately, we have to consider the negative side of the ledger as well. Unsurprisingly there, geopolitical forces, rising debt levels, social polarization in certain countries, domestic political frictions in certain countries, and of course climate change. All of these factors could weigh on growth going forward and derail our progress. So a lot to talk about. To help us unpack these complexities, we've got an absolutely star panel to do all of that. So let me go, I guess, counterclockwise and introduce our panelists for this discussion. Mohamad Al-Ississ is the Minister of Finance of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Minister, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Andre Hoffmann is the Chairman of Massellaz and Vice Chair of Roche. Andre, welcome.
Thank you.
Busi Mabuza is the Chair of the International Development Corporation of South Africa. And Dr. Peng is the President of the China Society of Economic Reform. Dr. Peng will be speaking in Mandarin, so for those who need simultaneous interpretation, please put on the device. English is channel 2. And just a reminder, if you are following the session or would like to share the session on social media, feel free to do so with the hashtag AMNC24. Yeah? So let's get the conversation started. First question I want to ask each panelist, because I think this first question sets the stage for us, and your unique perspectives will be shaped by the specific region you're based in, yeah? So give us your overall economic outlook for the region and globally. Minister, let me start with you.
Thank you, Michael, for having us, and it's an honor to be surrounded with such high-caliber panelists. For the Middle East region, it could be best summarized poetically by Dickens's Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of time, it was the worst of time, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the winter of despair and the spring of hope. You can think of the Middle East as separated into two categories, oil exporters and importers. For oil exporters, it's been a good time. I think there's a lot of wisdom going on among oil exporting countries. I was delighted to hear my friend, the minister from Saudi, Minister of Planning from Saudi, Faisal, yesterday mentioned that for the first time, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia surpassed in non-oil economy contribution, the oil contribution, 51% non-oil GDP contribution, which is terrific. It gives them more resilience to commodity shocks. I think it gives them a lot of levers for growth. That's great. Right next door to them is a number of countries, including Jordan, which are oil importers, that have been really reeling from multitude of shocks, one after another, that started with COVID, Russia, Ukraine, stagflation, higher interest for longer, the brutal war in Gaza that has sent the whole region into despair and frustration, and the duality of human standards, I think, when it comes to human rights. And we're facing very challenging times. At times like these, countries such as Jordan that have decided to invest in resilience, in building fiscal buffers, in building macroeconomic prudence, have weathered these shocks as good as it gets. In fact, last month we got upgraded for the first time in 21 years in our sovereign rating by Moody's, which is remarkable given the ongoing regional onslaught. But for many other countries, the pain is real. Inflation has been hitting the middle class in oil importer country in the Middle East hard. Some countries had to revisit their currency situation, and unemployment has been really rampant. All in all, to sum up, Michael, the duality of experiences that our region is experiencing will have to come into a convergence. As our region is young, 70% of Jordan's population is below the age of 30. And out of all the deficits that the Middle East suffers from, nothing worries me more than the deficit of hope among youth. And we must give them a potential for a hopeful future. Otherwise, the impact and ramifications of that will not be limited to the oil importing countries in the Middle East, but it will be widespread.
Thank you for that, Minister. Andre, over to you. So perhaps a tale of two regions in the Middle East. What about Europe? We see, for example, inflation still quite sticky in some parts of Europe, obviously still affected by geopolitical factors as well. What are you seeing?
Well, rather than getting involved into sort of short-term thinking, short-term sort of forecasting, I mean, there's a plethora of forecasts around the place, and some of them look very different than the others. If we're talking about poetry, we can say that it's, as Oscar Wilde said, you know, it's always difficult to make predictions, particularly about the future. And so I'm not going to sort of get into numbers, but I would like to talk about the quality of what we are doing. I mean, clearly, let me start by the beginning. I was born in 1958. We were 3.2 billion people on the planet. We are now 8 billion. 60 years later, or 60 plus, we have a bigger amount of prosperity than we ever had before. The 8 billion people on the planet today live better than the 3.2 billion people did in 1960. But the consequence of that has been the loss of biodiversity on a huge scale. I mean, according to the London Zoological Society, we have lost about 62% of the species of vertebrates only, because we don't measure invertebrates. So what I'm trying to say is that the current prosperity model is not fit for purpose in the long term, and what we need to do is to address the qualitative dimension, not as much as a quantity dimension. And so I know that the future from now on has to be into a much more integrated model, which will take into account the impact our growth is having on the social, the human, the natural capital, and how can we interconnect them. So in that context, the countries which are in the future, the regions which are in the future, going to be able to run these three capitals in parallel will do better. I take the example of Switzerland. We have no natural resources. We have nothing else than very good universities and excellent infrastructure. We used to have a flourishing bank industry, but that's a bit thing of the past at the moment. So how are we going to be able to take what we have in our hand to construct the future is really where the question lies. And there are some, again, we spoke about the pandemic. You know, the pandemic has demonstrated how unresilient the current system is, because it seems to be too focused onto one single metric. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winner 1976, the business of business is business. And now these externalities that Friedman developed are coming to have to be re-internalized. And that's a very worrying future for the old world. And so I think that the young world is going to tell us a bit more about this. When I say the young world, you're of course much more ancient than we are, but yeah, you know what I mean. So I'm going to not answer your question, because I'm not quite sure what's going to happen in the immediate future because of the many uncertainty factors we've just talked about. But I know for sure that the current status quo is not going to serve us for the next generation. So we need to do something about that.
And we will definitely touch upon how we can perhaps rethink growth in our conversation ahead.
Yes,
but Busi, you were speaking with Andre about the biodiversity of Africa as well. We're going to talk about that in a second also. But give us your outlook first from the vantage point of Africa.
So I thought Andre was going to say the young lady from the young world is going to tell us
That's what I
something
said.
interesting.
You're young at heart. That's what matters.
Michael, so the African continent, of course, is one of the spots of population growth that remains in the world. Population growing at an average of over 2.5% per annum, when the rest of the world is below 1% per annum. So it's a very important area of long-term focus, I think, for all of us, because we need this continent to go up the growth curve for the world growth to be sustainable into the foreseeable future. So if one looks at the McKinsey 2023 report that is titled Reimagining Economic Growth in the African Continent, they segment the countries in the continent into 4 categories. The slow growers, which unfortunately South Africa, my beautiful country, falls into and hopefully will snap out of in the near future. The consistent, rapid growers, and therein you find countries such as Rwanda, of course, which has been able to ensure a diversified economic activity. I think Ethiopia is also in that category. They have a category that they call the recent slowdowns. And unfortunately, in this category are some of the large African economies, such as Nigeria and Egypt. And then there are probably the countries that are too small to make an impact at this point in time, or for us to understand what is happening. And the combination of these factors indicates to us that there is potential in the African continent. I believe that a continent with the natural resources, such as the African continent has, should be leveraging the opportunities that the renewable energy, the green energy opportunity, which is one of the positives that you have pointed out, offers all of us, both in terms of unlocking energy supply in the continent, which we need for economic production, but also in terms of harnessing the critical minerals that the world now needs for the new greener energy future. And I would like to urge our partners in this regard that let's not take an extractive approach in partnering the continent in harnessing this opportunity, but rather let's, where it is possible, invest in the continent to ensure that more of the value is actually created in the African continent itself. This is one way of ensuring that this continent is part of the growth path of this world, which we absolutely need with the youthful population that we have.
Africa, definitely a growth pole in the future, population nearing 1.4 billion now, like you mentioned, young and dynamic. How do we better unleash Africa's potential, I think, is a big question for businesses everywhere around the world. Dr. Peng, let me come to you. China's growth outlook, first quarter GDP growth, of course, 5.3%. What are you seeing here in China?
这个非常高兴啊，时隔5年再次回到大连这么样一个美丽的海滨城市，啊，参加夏季达沃斯论坛。这次论坛的主题是全球经济增长的新前沿。我觉得呢，我们今天的这个话题呢，是靠近这个主题最近的一个话题，啊，不仅要研究世界经济增长的趋势，还要研究呢我们面临的各种风险。 刚才 Michael 前面提到了，说现在看到了一个相对潜在的比较乐观的一个增长的情况。我想这个判断呢，可能是更多的出自于6月11号世界银行发布了一个全球经济的一个展望。这个展望呢，它把今年的全球经济增长从年初的2.4调到了2.6，这就避免呢。 出现了连续3年的一个全球增长的下滑，因为2022年是3.1，23年呢是2.6，今年如果是年初2.4的话，那就3年一直在下滑。如果目前按照新的预期达到了全球增长2.6，这样的话就出现了一个回稳，啊，可能甚至未来有个复苏的这样的一个态势。我想呢，这个估计是有一定道理的，啊。 但是相对来讲，全球的经济还是形势比较严峻，啊，比较严峻。因为一方面， 刚才讲了，我们面临的一些风险挑战，既有地缘政治方面的带来的一些很激烈的冲突，啊，不论是俄乌的危机啊，还是巴以的冲突，啊，都是越演越烈，而且呢，看不到一个前景，啊，俄乌冲突虽然刚刚开了瑞士的这样的一个和会，但是呢，没有达到预期的效果，很有可能将来演变成就是克什米尔化，就长期的这样的形成目前的这样一个局面。巴以冲突呢，也有可能，我想这个最后这个进一步的对中东的局势啊，包括对于红海的运输通道，对整个全球的能源啊和货物的运输都会起到一些严重的影响。所以从这个角度来看，现在还真是没有太值得乐观的问题。至于这个气候变化的因素啊，自然灾害啊，这些问题始终是人类发展增长的一个挑战。但是我想在与此同时呢，与中国发展可能比较关键的啊，也是目前对世界经济和增长啊形成了一些挑战的，主要还是当前的出现了一些单边主义、贸易保护主义的这样的一些新的趋势啊，有一些国家呢热衷于搞小院高墙啊、脱钩断链呐啊，包括近期美国啊对中国进行301调查啊，提高了一些重要的中国产品的关税啊，最高的电动汽车关税提高到100%啊，半导体光伏电池提高了50%。欧盟啊，刚刚的上一周也发了一个消息啊，它在没有工商行业提出申请的前提下啊，对中国的电动汽车等产品也要进行这样的一些调查啊，这个不论是对中国的经济的增长，包括对全球的产业链、供应链，我觉得可能都会带来一定的影响，啊，所以下边呢，如果有机会，可以再展开谈这个问题。至于中国的经济，我想呢，继去年增长了5.2以后，啊，今年呢还实现了一个比较好的开局，1季度5.3，啊，这个各项投资啊、消费啊、出口啊各项指标，特别是出口啊，在4月份、5月份啊都有一定的这个积极的这样一些迹象。所以我想呢，中国的经济的增长对全球的增长还是至关重要的啊。不客气的讲，是全球经济增长的一个发动机啊。每年对全球经济增长的贡献在30%以上啊。所以中国的经济，包括下一步我们要开一些重要的会议啊，还要进一步的通过改革，通过高水平的对外开放，来保持经济增长的一个势头，对全球的增长呢做出贡献。就这样。
Great. Thanks for that, Dr. Peng. I find it interesting because my first question was talking about near-term outlook, but I think all of our panelists spoke more about the medium-term and the long-term mindset, which I think is a good thing to discuss if we want to find collective solutions to all these challenges. I showed everyone the set of risks that the forum considers as potentially impacting growth going forward. Minister Al-Ississ, I want to get your thoughts in terms of what do you think are the biggest risks that will challenge growth in, I guess, the 5 or maybe 10 years ahead? I know it's very difficult to predict. Geopolitics, for example, Dr. Peng was touching on, perhaps other risks that we haven't thought about. What do you think?
It's a very complex economic landscape we're living in now. The world has recovered from a number of subsequent shocks that created supply and demand simultaneous shocks. COVID was a supply and demand shock simultaneously. Russia-Ukraine created a supply shock in Europe. The reverberations of what's happening in the Middle East region with, as the doctor said, the disruption of maritime shipping routes in the Red Sea is affecting the whole global economy. All of the above is coming layered on each other. Some areas of the world will see earlier recovery, such as the US, than other countries. As they start adjusting their monetary policy, not in sync with other countries, this will complicate the situation globally. So you have multiple waves hitting different parts of the world at different times with different magnitudes. This is the status quo. So assuming no other shocks, the situation is complex. But as the survey you showed, I think spot on shows, we're at a time of inflection points. Technological inflection point with AI is real. It's gonna replace a good number of jobs. That's gonna then further accumulate social tension within states as more and more people will be let out of their jobs because they're being replaced by AI. But on the other hand, AI is creating real opportunities in different industries, healthcare and others. So reskilling and re-equipping the human capital becomes a top priority to adopt with change. But of course, that redistribution will take time and will have political and economic impact within countries, which will enhance that tension. The protectionist situation we're seeing globally, the doctor mentioned EVs, we're seeing different protectionism measures taking place globally as countries are adjusting to the mix of new technologies coming to rise with new powers. That is going to create a lot of tension within countries. The world is experiencing the highest number of elections this year, unprecedented in the modern history to see this number of elections. At the current situation and at the current concerns and fears, these elections will then exacerbate this protectionist approach. So it's a very complex period. There are, of course, positives. Technology is a big positive. Young continents such as Africa and the Middle East is a big positive. But reality is the era of cheap money, I think, is behind us, at least for the middle run. We're not going to be seeing a return to the cheap money that we saw pre-COVID in the medium term. So it's going to be a very tough period. As a Minister of Finance, I am aware of all of the above, and therefore my focus remains every day, build fiscal buffers, maintain resilience at any cost, protect the middle class. And growth has to come from real structural growth that's technologically driven, not from chasing low-hanging fruits that we had before COVID through the era of cheap money and expansionary policies, because these are not coming back anytime soon. So I think, in a nutshell, I think, as Warren Buffett said, it's when the seawater recedes that we see who's been swimming naked and who's been wearing a bathing suit. And we're seeing that. Some countries are suffering dearly. Some countries are building on the resilience they invested in to enhance their growth.
And perhaps we can come back and you can expand for our audience. How do you view fiscal policy and how can we build those buffers for resiliency down the road? Andre, same question to you. The biggest risks you see impacting growth going forward. You mentioned the environment. Is there anything else that's on your radar?
Well, the planetary limits strike me as being the most important thing. In our health industry, we have to deal with new pathologies emerging more and more. I mean, we have, of course, the whole gambit of infectious diseases. The number of vectors that survive in our geographies are increasing. We have more. Dengue has arrived in Germany and in France. We have new breeds of fungus developing in agricultural crops. This year, it is forecasted that the grain crop in Central Europe is going to be 40% down because of excessive water. I mean, we are getting into a clear signs that we are hurting the wall of development as we know it until now, at least in our economies. So what can we do about it? We need, of course, to, as the Minister just said, to increase the resilience of our systems, and the COVID pandemic has demonstrated clearly that we are not resilient, and so we need to make sure that we increase the breadth of what you do rather than focusing too much on a couple of targets. So just focusing on growth, which has been the paradigm until now, is probably not going to be enough. We should not look at the quantitative growth, we should look at the qualitative growth. And I think that's in that context, the current obsession with businesses to shorten supply chains, to bring back to a lot of economic activity within each international boundaries is not helping us. You know, multilateralism was the globalization, as we used to call it, was the source of richness that brought us the prosperity I referred to in my opening remarks. And I think that if we do lose this too quickly, it's going to have serious consequences. So the answer to the question is yes, I do see planetary limits as a problem, but I also do see the fact that we don't face it united as at least as significant problem. Sorry.
So then, from a policymaker perspective, from a business perspective, how do we rethink growth? Because behind that GDP number, we're talking about the aspirations of individuals. We're talking about families who want a better future for their children. It's not just a number. What we can agree on going forward is that we want growth to be more inclusive, more resilient, like you said, more innovative, more balanced. So in terms of that shift in mindset, what do we need in terms of rethinking growth, less emphasis on that GDP number? What can businesses and policymakers do?
So if you want to go from prosperity to sustainable, inclusive prosperity, we're going to have to measure success in a different way. And you know, to measure success in a different way, we need to be able to measure our surroundings in a different way. I had the opportunity to say that earlier on today. For me, quite clearly, the accountants are going to save the planet. We need to make absolutely, I know it makes people smile when I say that. You know, we have to be able to quantify the impact we are having on the social, on the human, and on the natural capital, and understand the interactions, as we said before. But for me, what's important is this notion that we need to identify a metric that will be accepted by all. And concentrating only on one metric, as we do now, the financial flows, is not going to be enough. If we can school up a new school of accounting, which gives us a real impact reporting, an integrated consequence of our dealings with the planet, I think we are more likely to create a strong growth, which is going to be, when I say strong, I mean a robust growth, a growth that's not going to be challenged. So for me, the next step has to be in increasing the breadth of what you do and not just focusing on too narrow things. That will increase resilience and it will give us a better quality of result. And in particular, you're right to mention the aspirations of people. It will allow us to make people more happy, which is really the base of our system. If we don't have, you know, why do we try to establish prosperity? Is to make sure that people can have security and future realization. And that's what we need to focus on.
Do we need a happiness index? How do we measure happiness?
Well, the happiness index, as long as we agree how we define happiness, yes. I mean, if the happiness is just the new, I don't know, the new Mercedes or the new Louis Vuitton bag or something like this, then I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make advertising here. You know, if we only focus on this, then we're not going to get there. It's not materiality. Happiness is about being self-realized. It's about being able to meet your aspirations. And that's not just about financial means. Of course, you know, the Maslow pyramids, you need enough to have a roof over your head, to educate your children, to be heated, to be fed, I mean, all these things. But once you get there, the next step is probably a bit excessive.
Dr. Peng, I want to get your thoughts on this, because here in China, the country has been very consistent in talking about high quality growth. It's not just growth, it's not just the GDP number. Talk to us about how China might be rethinking growth.
这个今年呢是中华人民共和国成立75周年，同时呢也是中国制定“十四五”规划，完成这个“十四五”规划的目标，进一步制定“十五五”规划的这样一个很关键的一个年份啊，就对当前经济形势的分析，对下一步中国发展战略的确定啊，今年、明年是非常关键的一个时期。 刚才讲到这个高质量的增长，中国一直把高质量增长，包括发展新质生产力，作为我们当前的一个非常重要的任务。因为这也是应对目前全球化过程，包括这个数字革命这个飞速发展啊所带来的一些新的机遇、新的一些挑战，包括像人工 AI 啊，包括5G 技术啊，还有这个。 大量的新的技术啊，这个中国呢需要通过科技革命的一些新的突破，通过一些传统产业的升级转型啊，特别是对于整个生产要素的这个配置啊，进行重新的创新性的配置啊，来 这个创造更多的新质的生产力，就是最好的优质的生产力，这样呢能给实现中国现代化来这个带来一个很好的这样的一个推动力。而实现这些现代化呢，我想这个重要的动力啊还在于改革啊，因为中国的改革呢是搞了45年了，也是在过去，包括从上个世纪后半期到目前，这个整个人类历史上最伟大的一个探索，最重要的一个探索啊，解决了将近14亿人的一个基本的温饱。中国从一个弱国变成一个强国啊，世界第2大的经济体，这个呢完全是改革的一个成果。所以我想呢，在今后的这一段时间里，中国会集中的把重点放到进一步的制定一些市场化改革的措施，来推动新质生产力，推动高质量发展，为这个下一个5年计划，就从2025到2030这个5年计划来制定一个很好的战略。中国的经济稳定，中国的经济发展，我想本身它对全球也是一个贡献。
Dr. Peng, I want to stay with you for a second. So, like you mentioned, China, a major contributor to global growth, around 1/3. Coming up, we have the 3rd plenum, which will have a very strong focus on reform and opening up as well. What do you think are perhaps some of the most important reforms in the Chinese economy right now? But also, what are perhaps some of the most underappreciated reforms that you feel the international community, the international business community, and investors should know about?
这个应该讲呢，中国的改革在下个月召开的中国共产党20届3中全会上会做出一系列的重要的决定。这个决定呢，很大程度上是要解决中国目前发展中的问题啊，所以既是问题导向的，同时也是目标导向的。问题导向就是解决发展中存在的问题啊，包括现在有效需求不足这方面的一些问题。目标导向呢，就是中国还要坚持走社会主义市场经济的这样的道路，这个呢是我们当前要解决的问题。而改革呢，首先要建立有活力、有竞争力、创造力的这样的市场主体。这个市场主体啊，当然也包括中国目前存在的还一定比例的国有经济，但是更重要的是要解决中国的民营经济的这种竞争力、创造力和活力的问题。因为在过去的这个30-40年，中国的民营经济从无到有，从小到强，现在创造了这个3500万个这个私营企业，1亿2000万个个体经营的这样的个体户，这个是很大的一个市场主体。但是这些企业呢，怎么样能够为社会做更大的贡献啊？这个呢，需要我们的制定一系列的更好的政策，来使他们在经济中起到更好的作用。这是恐怕是最重要的一项任务。另外呢，我们还要进一步的加强这个高水平的制度性的开放，就是在规则、规制、标准、管理这方面实现进一步的开放。比如说，要进一步的清理和减少这个外商准入的准入的这样的一些范围啊，已经承诺要把中国的制造业对外商的限制完全去掉，完全去除啊。我觉得这都是一个非常好的姿态啊。另外，在电信医疗这方面的对外准入，可能慢慢都要取消啊。这都给外商进入中国也创造一个很好的一个环境。与此同时呢，中国还会更进一步的发挥"一带一路"的作用包括发挥RCEP就是区域经济合作伙伴的这样的一个协议的作用把这个RCEP 所包含的15个国家整个的东盟中国、日本、韩国、澳大利亚、新西兰，这形成一个全球最大的一个自由贸易体这个自由贸易体如果发挥好的作用 差不多占全球接近30%的人口和 GDP 啊，它就能够有一个更大的活力啊，这也是中国下一步想进一步在推动的工作。
So China's reforms.
Yeah.
Also a potential growth point for businesses around the world amidst all the complexity that we are seeing. I want to come to technology because the Summer Davos, the annual meeting of the new champions, this is the forum's premier platform for science, innovation, and technology. We touched upon artificial intelligence, and I can't wrap my head right now whether or not artificial intelligence is good or bad for growth. So hopefully I want to get some wisdom from all of our panelists because reading through Mustafa Suleiman's book, The Coming Wave, the co-founder of the AI lab, DeepMind, the author was talking about a super cluster when it comes to the innovation wave that we're going to see. Basically, comparing it to a Cambrian explosion when it comes to this new wave of technology that we're going to be seeing. Is it a double-edged sword? Is it an opportunity? Can it raise total factor productivity and boost growth, or is it going to perhaps lower TFP? Busi, let me start with you. On net, we know AI can be a double-edged sword. On net, what are you feeling right now in terms of the impact AI might have on societies, and how concerned are you about potentially the AI divide among economies and regions as well?
I'll start with what I am hoping technology will bring to the world, and which is a better quality and way of doing things. I am, of course, anxious because I come from a continent where there is a country where there's 50% youth unemployment. We're seeing, and I must give accolades to the chief economist of the World Economic Forum for picking up the issue of social disparities and social discord within nations. And we're seeing this play out in economies such as Kenya and other economies as well through the elections and the reaction, of course, of the political and policymakers is to then lift barriers and try to keep other people out. Whereas the problem could just be how we address our own internal structural issues. So I am hoping that technology will give opportunity, especially for the young African youth, to start creating their own jobs. It is absolutely magnificent to hear China talk about 120 million self-employed individuals. This is the kind of entrepreneurship that we need in the continent and that we see in other parts of the continent. Nigeria is a fine example of thriving, and Kenya, of course, thriving informal sector where people are self-employed and where they are innovating for their market and doing wonderful things. The technology that we are seeing is clearly already addressing issues that would have taken us very long to address. I think the gaps that we see in the African continent where there's no legacy systems create an opportunity for us to leapfrog into the new future. And I think we're well poised to do that. If I may use the opportunity to just refer to the fact that as the BRICS nations, we work, I work through the BRICS Business Council. Therein, we work through working groups, and one of the most important working groups is the Skills Development Working Group, where we share information, we share knowledge, we share technologies, we invite young people to come and showcase the technologies that they are developing that are addressing local issues but may have global applications going forward. Those are opportunities that are opening up for the future.
Same question to all our panelists. Minister Al-Ississ, what about you? Net impact of AI on societies?
Whether we like it or not, whether we think it's good or bad, AI is here and is here to stay and will change the way we live. That's a reality. It will come with its goods, it will come with its bads. I had a chance to chat with Sam Altman, the founder of ChatGPT, a couple of years ago, And I asked him, what is your biggest concern 50 years from now? He said, should I have turned on the button? Because the moment I click start, I lost control of it. It will take a life of its own. It's very hard to control. And reality is, it's evolving in a very complex way, and we need to come as humanity, whether we bicker about EVs or climate change or socio-political tension, we must come as humanity and put the right regulations so that AI does not, in a unilateral way, change our life to the worst. That is a potential, and we must be very cognizant of that. There is a lot of different scenarios which are positive for our lives, but we must protect from the negative. And reality is, like climate change, this requires multinational coordination, and we must come together, put our concerns aside, because this is going to affect our small planet it could affect it in ways that are irreversible. That's the reality. Some of the impacts it will have is technology disrupts. And I'm very happy to hear the hopeful view from Africa, but reality is not everybody will be a successful entrepreneur, and people will lose their jobs, and that will create social tension. We are all alarmed about seeing what happened in Kenya yesterday. That socio-economic disruption will only accelerate, magnified by elections taking this year, magnified and accelerated by AI, magnified by protectionist policies, magnified by unemployment among the youth. Reality is, there is a lot of multiple equilibria. Some of them are negative. Not all of them are positive. And we must invest in social protection. It is our duty to help those that are in need have their basics supplied and available and equipped. But reality is, like any technological inflection, it will create winners, and that's great, and they tend to be few, and they will win big, and will create losers, and they tend to be many, and they will then get polarized. I think the chief economist here picked it very well when he said, or she said, intrastate polarization is a real concern. AI, whether we like it or not, will change our lives. What are we doing as a humanity to lessen the negative impact of that now? I think very little.
Minister, you asked Sam Altman, and he said he was concerned about turning on the button. Did you ask him, can we turn off the button? Is it possible?
I don't think you can turn it off. I don't think you want to turn it off. I think AI is wonderful. I think AI can be used to improve our human experience in magnificent ways. But reality is, it will take a life of its own, and it will be very hard to control, and it could be weaponized. And that's a real concern.
Are emerging markets, developing economies, are they prepared to weather this AI revolution?
We all like to give a positive, optimistic overview. Reality is absolutely not. We weren't prepared to face COVID. We weren't prepared to face the previous multitude of political tension. We're still fighting the same wars that we started centuries ago. There is very little faith I have that we are ready to face the coming multitude. I had dinner yesterday with a group of Jordanian entrepreneurs that are here in Dalian. Magnificent force for the positive. It is our job as governments, I think, to empower them, stay out of their way, but at the same time to protect the middle class from the upcoming upheaval we will all face.
I wish Sam Altman was here. He was at the annual meeting in Davos where he said at the forum that we are, if I'm remembering correctly, reasonably close-ish to artificial general intelligence, which, depending on how you want to define it, is intelligence at the human level or surpassing the human level. Andre, are you concerned? Are you glass half full, glass half empty on artificial intelligence? Where do you stand?
Perhaps just an anecdote about Sam and his views about what I met him in Davos last winter, and we had this conversation. And I come from the conservation movement, from the nature movement, and one of the things we often talk about when we talk about the nuclear energy is the 3 Mile Island incident. The day when the factory suddenly the supervisor lost control, and we developed this idea of a Chinese syndrome. The machine was going to go straight through the globe and destroy China. It didn't happen, but since then that rhetoric, that vocabulary, the 3 Mile Islands incident, has stayed as a sort of nightmare scenario. So I asked him, what is your 3 Mile Island scenario? And it was very similar to what you just said. Once it runs, there's very little we can do. The day the tool, as he calls it, will commission its own research, then we will, of course, no longer be in control, and we'll have to think that it's for the positive. I happen to share your enthusiasm. I think a disruption is needed. The current status quo is not working, and AI could be that disruption, especially if it's framed in the right way, especially if we do not, and sorry for contradict you, especially if we do not let the market decide who is going to be the winner or the loser. The risk is too big to just leave it completely unchallenged. I went to business school and I was told very clearly, the market is always right. Whatever you do, don't worry, the market will solve for it. Well, it's a lie. It's not true. We need regulators. We need regulators with strong teeth to be able to actually make a difference. Now, maybe the World Economic Forum is not the best place to talk about this, but the market needs framing, and I think that AI could help us to do that. And so let's develop that in the most possible way. If I bring it back to my industry, in the healthcare, it helps us for 3 things. It helps us for gathering more information about what diseases actually are. It helps us how to identify how we're going to solve these diseases. But it also helps us, of course, in the production capacity. How can we automate our processes so that we have less problems with a faulty batch from time to time? And I think that's a good sort of summary of what artificial intelligence can bring to the production capacity of the planet. We will get better, quicker, and we will also discover new ways of doing things. And that's a wonderful opportunity to change the status quo, because, as we said before, the status quo is not working. We do have a lot of symptoms that the system is under threat. I mean, climate change, anger and angst among the youth, rise of inequalities, which really has to be the biggest problem to address.
Dr. Peng, I want to get your thoughts on artificial intelligence. How important is AI for China's growth trajectory? You mentioned in your earlier remarks the concept of new quality productive forces, which in essence is about advanced productivity. So talk to us about how China is thinking about AI.
这个人工智能啊，基本上是过去1年来等于人类的科技进步历史上最重大的一个发现或者发明。 虽然这个智能问题呢，人工智能问题呢，经历了4个阶段，将近有80多年的历史，但是最近这个第4次，特别是人工智能，这个对于整个的技术的使用，对于整个世界的转变，包括整个对生产关系可能带来的影响，我想都是难以想象的，过去无论如何想象不到，这个。 但是人工智能呢，依托的是什么呢？是互联网的大数据，另外呢，这个大模型，包括它有大算力，在这些方面呢，中国呢也是有从政府到研究部门到一些科学家都是高度重视的。虽然我们的大数据应该在全球来讲，这个数据量啊是个海量的数据，因为中国有最大的制造业，这些制造业。 产生的数据就是非常大的，中国又有600多个城市，600个城市在这个智慧城市包括现代的管理方面产生的数据也是巨大的。同时呢，中国又是一个最大的人口的14亿人口，其中有10亿人是使用智能手机和这个使用和这个创造数据的，所以中国的数据是最多的。但是中国目前的问题就是我们在算力方面，在大模型方面，还没有达到一个世界一流的水平，这个全球最好的人工智能的这样一些企业，它的制造的大模型里边可能有上万亿的这样的浮点的参数，中国呢可能现在讲起来就是1000亿左右的一个浮点参数，基本上相当于1/10这样的一个水平，所以下一步呢，可能还要重点的。 在这个模型的进一步的完善，算力的进一步的 改善，在这方面呢要下更大的功夫能够在这个人工智能的使用方面，为中国的经济也为全球的经济能够创造更好的一个动力。
Okay. So we've got around 10 minutes left, but I do want to leave some time for our audience to engage with our panelists. But I want to end on a more positive note in terms of how we can foster stronger regional and global cooperation to navigate all the complexity, the risks that we see to foster stronger growth. So how about we get 1 or 2 sentences on that? Minister, let me start with you.
Listen, the concerns that different parts of the world have are real, and they're translating them into policies. Some are protectionist, some are sheer out tension and aggression. And we need to appreciate that the concerns are real, and we need to invest in confidence building measures. We need to tread carefully because with the rising amount of protectionism, conservatism, right-sided governments, I think there is a potential for things to really accelerate in a negative way. My plea to everybody is take these concerns real, invest in local knowledge in places you're working in. Many times, one thing we know from the failure of the Washington Consensus a few decades ago is that one size does not fit all. And local knowledge really matters. And we must really invest in a better understanding of the hopes, aspirations, and real fears of different parts of the world, and not jump in with a lot of financial powerhouses that can really bring a lot of short-term good, but could really distract in the long term by exacerbating the concerns and fear.
Andre?
Well, I strongly echo what I just heard. One size does not fit all, and if you really want to have this new spurt of growth, we need to make sure that we unite behind a common goal. And that common goal has to be to create prosperity that we can share. And this is not a question of revolutionary sort of change of social system. It's a question of making sure that if you want to promote stability, you need to make sure that frustrations are eliminated. And the hope that we've been trying to restore in Davos in January, and we're trying to since then, the hope that we need to create a certain stability in the system needs to be nurtured. At the moment, I see around me people talking all the time about it's going to be worse tomorrow. Well, no. It's going to be better if we want it to be better. If we unite behind that particular goal, we want to create the wealth that we can share. In our company, again, we have redefined our purpose as doing today what the patient needs next. And I would suggest that this message can go to the rest of the planet. We need to do today what will make the planet prosperous next year, in the next generation.
Busi?
Absolutely the same views. Multilateralism. We need to respect each other's autonomy and collaborate for the long-term future. And secondly, taking a long-term view. Short-termism is very, very costly, and it is very important that we all commit to living this world much better than we found it.
Dr. Peng, your final thoughts.
这个应该讲呢，世界目前的形势，很多专家呀有一些不同的看法啊。有的说呢，全球化遭受了重大的挫折；也有的说呢，全球化没有死，全球化还要继续。从我个人看来，包括中国经济的过去的快速成长，包括很多发达国家过去的一些成长，还是得益于全球化的进程啊，有一个世界贸易的规则啊，有一个合作、和平发展的这样的一个环境，对于每个国家的发展，对于全球经济的繁荣都是至关重要的啊。但是因为现在的地缘政治的这个冲突激化啊，包括出现了一些泛政治化、泛安全化、泛去风险化啊这样的一些趋势啊，实际上对于整个经济的影响还是比较大。这个造成了一些信任危机啊，全球的产业链、供应链啊出现了一些不稳固、受冲击的现象。所以我想呢，最重要的是还是要互相尊重啊，不同国家自己的核心利益， 尊重不同的民族文化和它的历史所给他提供的这样道路啊。这个中国呀有一个很有名的人啊讲过一句话，叫各美其美，美人之美，美美与共，天下大美。就是每个人有自己的特点，每个人要充分发挥自己的优势，同时呢也要帮助别人，允许别人发挥他的优势，这样的话全天下才能有一个更好的美好的未来。谢谢。
Words of wisdom. Dr. Peng, thank you for that. I want to open it up to audience questions right now. So if anyone has a question, and let's wait for the mic to get to you. And if you could introduce yourself and then ask a brief question and say who you want to address the question to.
Thank you very much. My name is Peng from Global Shapers Community Beijing Hub 2. I want to address this question to all the panelists. So for aspiring young entrepreneurs in the future, especially in the age of AI, what kind of areas or industries do you think present some of the most promising business opportunities in the future? Thank you.
Can I?
Go for it.
Pharmaceuticals, absolutely.
Who would have guessed?
No, what I mean is improvement to the healthcare system. I mean, pharmaceutical companies, just innovating on one or two molecules is not going to cut it. What we need is to address the unmet medical need, and that's a system issue. It's not just an individual issue. But the convergence of all the technology we talked about, AI, microelectronic, drones, whatever, all this together can help us to better develop the healthcare systems on the planet. And that, I think, if I were starting today, I would go there.
I'm tempted to say if you can replace government.
Interesting.
Even better.
Minister, would you like to respond to Busi?
I'll be unemployed. No, in all seriousness, I think AI will really accelerate in areas where you can take big data, understand trends very quickly, and build quick predictions. Healthcare is an obvious one, but I think it's unlimited, from traffic control to gaming, to what have you. I think if I were you, I would invest in a better understanding of data analytics, because it can take you to different places across different industries. Look at cross-cutting areas and skills, because these are the ones that will be most positively impacted by AI.
Dr. Peng, would you like to address this global shaper?
这个中国的制造业啊，总体来讲，在全球还是独树一帜的啊，同时具有最完全的这样的一个产业部门。但是制造业在这个数字革命的这样的一个大的背景下，怎么样？特别是在 AI 的这样的技术的发展的前提下，怎么样能够取得一个新的一个进步？我想呢，确实非常重要啊，非常重要。但是我也不赞成说的大家的把投资啊都放到那些最先进、最尖端的领域中去啊，恐怕还是要从本地区本产业的一些这个实际情况出发啊，选择那些市场的需求，包括为人民群众能够创造更好的利益的这方面的一些领域中去啊，具体的领域我们可能也还可以通过其他渠道再进一步的交流啊，谢谢。
Other questions? Yes, gentleman over here.
Thank you. I want to ask a question to the minister. So you know that a lot of Chinese companies go overseas searching for the business opportunities. Middle East is the hot destination. But most of the Chinese companies just know about the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So you're from Jordan. So if you give us some kind of landscape about Jordan's strategy, development plan in the coming future years, and also recommendations to the Chinese companies, maybe can do some business or investment in Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Like Switzerland, Jordan does not have natural resources, so we had no choice but to heavily invest in our human capital. So you can find solid human capital, you can find macro stability and resilience and prudence. We are an oasis of stability among a burning Middle East. So you can base yourself in Jordan and serve a market that is not only the Middle East, but we have free trade agreements with the EU, with the US, with the Arab world. We have young entrepreneurs. One of them is sitting right there. one of our success stories there, and they do business globally. Some of the entrepreneurs I talk to are doing business with Chinese companies here. The one advice I have is, as I said, the Middle East is very diverse. It's a big region, and those that have oil resources are very different from those that don't. But what is missing in the formula is a deep local understanding. I would advise Chinese companies that want to do business in the Middle East, invest in understanding the concerns, fears, and aspirations of the specific country you're entering. Because really, it is very diverse. We're very, like China, we're very proud of our history and civilization. But like China, we have big aspirations coming from our youthful populations. I think there is a lot of positives coming in. But reality is there is a lot of concern. There is a lot of fear going on because of these transitions. And I am the first to admit my ignorance when I come to do business in China. I think it's very important for Chinese companies also to invest in a deep-rooted understanding of the other, because I think it matters. We are open for business. It's a great opportunity to do business that serves not only the Middle East, but the whole region. And you can find human capital at a lower turnover and lower cost than elsewhere. And we are happy, I'm sure the entrepreneurs that are here are happy to establish these bridges, but we must build the bridges before we parachute in.
One more question. Do we have one more question? Yes.
It's Martin Frank from Invesco. I'd like to address this question to the whole panel, or whoever wants to address it. Really interesting discussion. And thinking it through, I was just, this whole concept of longer term, we need to be thinking towards common goals to achieve, quality, sustainable growth. I hate saying this at a forum like this, but it's just so hard to reconcile that, as the Minister said, in a world where we're seeing increased mercantilism, we're seeing increased populism. It feels like shorter term, whilst we have this longer term hope, shorter term, it almost feels that this element of sovereignty, it's every person for themselves.
For me, the question you're addressing is absolutely fundamental. We need to change our value system. The success is not the short-term material gain. I mean, can you imagine the complexity of teaching that, or of sharing that with the population of the world? We need to find different incentives to success. And we were joking about the happiness index before. It has a lot to do with how you define your own mental attitudes about the rest of the planet. So the usual excuse when you go to forums like this, and I've been going to one or two of them, is to say, well, the millennium will solve it, the next generation will solve it. I think we really do need to do a serious introspection. The current system leads us to the precipice, and we know that. Mm-hmm. Not a very hopeful answer, I'm sorry.
I share your concern, and I think you put it beautifully, really. Reality is, when people go to the ballots, they vote for the lowest common denominator, sadly, because polarization takes you in that direction. The lowest common denominator is highly divisive and highly polarized. And therefore, if we wait for that to emerge naturally, as you, sir, said, I doubt it will happen fast enough for us to address these concerns. I think that's why I personally invest in coming to places like this, because I think you need a meta structure that thinks beyond the tomorrows. Listen, when you're a politician, you're really under continuous attack from developments, from recent affairs, from recent challenges, and you shift very easily into firefighting mode. And what we need is a meta structure that thinks about, the longer term, the thriving, the thing that nobody wants to talk about, but it's going to change and touch everybody's life. And I don't think that will emerge naturally. We have to invest in it. We have to push it down. We probably are already too late in doing a lot of that, and we shouldn't wait even longer.
Yeah. So beautifully put by the Minister. In no way is the contrast more stark than in the African continent, where we, on the one hand, are talking about a continental free trade area, and yet on the other hand, we have countries such as mine, where there's 30% to 50% unemployment if you're looking at the youth only. And therefore, the knee-jerk reaction is to try and be protectionist in order to protect the jobs. What's important about coming to these fora is to hear the like-minded inputs and keep reminding ourselves that the most important investment is the one that is for the long term.
Okay. We are all out of time. Fantastic conversation. Thank you to all our panelists. We know, of course, growth is definitely a function of the complex risks that we face today, but hopefully we will see more international cooperation that can help us navigate these risks a little bit better. So hopefully we can also embrace the complexity with more confidence and verve to build a better future for all of us. Also, if everyone is interested in that chief economist's outlook report that I was talking about at the World Economic Forum, we've put up a QR code for everyone to scan, for everyone to take a deeper look as well. So thank you all to our panelists. Thank you to our audience for joining us in this session. Everyone enjoy beautiful Dalian. Thank you all.
Thank you, Michael.